All right, guys, so let's finish this off. So this one is just a discriminant. So if you remember from the discriminant, let me turn on my board. I forgot to turn this on. This is the inside part of the quadratic formula. So this is just the b squared minus 4ac. I'm not going to put the square root because we don't really need it. So if I'm doing b squared minus 4ac, I'm going to do, oops, I was wondering if that was going to happen. So my b in this case is going to be 4, particularly this 4. 4 squared minus 4. My a is 3, and then my c is also 4. So when I do this, I get 16. But if I'm looking at it, I have one negative. So I know I'm going to get something very big and negative, but it does want me to put in the value of the discriminant. So I'm going to solve this. I get 16 minus 48. If I were to do this as 48 minus 16, first of all, I know this is a negative. So because I know this is a negative, um, because of the fact that there's more negatives than positives, that would be 3. So I have 32. So that means if I have a negative, then I have two imaginary or complex, whichever way you want to write it. So I'm going to say two imaginary solutions. All right. And then from there, let's go to the next one. And again, we're only looking at the discriminant. Normally I say I don't really care about the value, but they are asking it for this one. So we would do this 2 squared for the b, and then minus 4ac. So you know what? Let me color code this a little bit just so you guys can kind of see what's going on here. B squared minus 4ac. So b for a and c. So to do this, we're going to get this 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times another 4. So here I'm going to get this 4 minus 12. So I get this negative 44. So I just did that really fast, but just 48 minus 4. And this again is imaginary, so I have two imaginary solutions. All right, now let's move on to the next one. So again, I'm going to look for my A, B, and C. And I have my B in yellow, so my B is negative 6. And then I have this 9. And then here I have this 2. So when I'm doing this, I'm going to say negative 6 squared minus 4ac, that's 9, and positive. So even though this is a negative 6, we're going to put it both in parentheses, which makes it positive 36. So essentially b squared should always be positive. Then I get negative 36 times 2, make it negative 72. And interesting enough, because there's two of these negative 36s, our answer ended up being negative 36. So this is also two imaginary solutions. Use the quadratic formula to complete the table. We don't really need the quadratic formula. It was just this. I was just like reading it. I was like, hey, it says quadratic formula instead of discriminant. So we have that. Next, we see solve this formula by completing the square. So when we're completing the square, what we have to do here is we're moving over this 6 to the other side to kind of leave this by itself. And we're going to take half of this b. and then square it. So this becomes x squared minus half of 4. So half of this 4 is 2, and we square it, so we have to do plus 2. But we can't just do that out of nowhere. So on the other side, we also have to add 4. Now, remember that I always said this half of b is very important, because what happens here is now we do x minus that half of b. So negative 4 half is negative 2. Then we can square it. This ends up being a perfect square. X squared minus 4x plus 4. And the reason for that is because if we do negative 2, we get that positive 4. But more importantly, we're going to get this negative 2x. So that's how come this half is important. And then from here, we're going to end up getting negative 2. So by answering this, we would say that x minus 2 squared equals negative 2. We're going to square root both sides. That's going to make us a plus or a minus square root of negative 2, which ends up being, we're going to split these into two possibilities, x minus 2, and I'm going to take out that I while I'm at it, equals plus or minus I square root 2, or I'm sorry, I forgot, I'm splitting this, I square root 2, or x minus 2 equals negative I square root 2. Add 2 to both sides, so I get x equals 2 plus I square root 2, or 2 minus I square root 2. So this one was pretty simple. There wasn't anything special. I just moved it over. I didn't have to split it right off the bat, but I decided to. I guess there was no point in doing it, but it worked out. So we have these two answers. So these are two of our imaginary answers. I didn't have to do like a square root. I could just complete the square. It is a harder method than the quadratic formula, but I think it does have its place. It just takes practice. So let's take a look at these. So now we're going to do these using any method of my choice. Well, looking at this one, I'm like, oh, this is simple. There's no b. So if there's no b, I might as well solve it by square rooting. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move this 4 over. X squared equals, I'm adding the 4 to both sides. So I get negative 8. So in other words, x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 8. So if I wanted to simplify this, what I would do is I would have to factor tree this. So I get 2 and 4, crossing this out. And I know that 4 has a square root. So I can also say this is x equals, the square root of 4 is 2. And because it's the square root of negative 8, don't forget this negative, I have this I. And then this one, since he's by himself, he stays inside. So it's plus or minus 2I square root 2. So the method I would use here would be square rooting. Square rooting. And obviously we already know about imaginary numbers, so I don't have to say it's just imaginary number method. And because of this, I'm going to say that I have, it says solutions. So those are my solutions. This isn't asking for the number of solutions. It's just saying how many solutions or what are the solutions. So those are my solutions right there. This next one, I'm going to use the quadratic formula just so we can get some practice in it. And that way I don't have to move this 10 over. Also, one of the reasons why I would use quadratic formula is I don't like this negative 9. When you're doing completing the square, you want to make sure you don't have anything there. So if you don't have any, if you do have something there, it'll probably be easier to just use the quadratic formula. So this is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this ends up being, my b is 4, so I'm going to say negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4ac. Oh, ac, derp. My a would be negative 9, and then my c would be negative 10. Too many 4s in this. I kept thinking 4 was everything. And then all over 2 times negative 9. So if I'm doing that, what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to do all my multiplication first. So negative b plus or minus square root of 4 times 4 is 16. And then I'm going to do this negative 9 times negative 10 times negative 4. So I know that there's 3 negatives, so my answer should be negative. So I just go 4 times 9 times 10, and I'm going to get 36. So I get negative 36, or 360, all over negative 18. All right. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do all my subtraction. So I'm going to get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of, let's find out what 16 take away 36 is. 16 take away 360. I keep saying 36. And I get this negative 344. Now I want to break this down. So I'm going to break this down. I'm going to try dividing by 2. So if I divide by 2, I know half of 360 is 150. Half of 44 is 22. If I add those two together, I get 172. Because I'm doing that 150 plus half of 44, which is 22. So I get 172. I'm going to divide this in 2 again, which is going to help me out because I already see a pair of 2's there. Divide this out. 2 goes into 17 8 times. Carry the 1 is 6. All right. Gonna break this up into 2 again because why not? And this is 43. So this can't really break up anymore. So I know that my answer is going to be this negative 4 plus or minus the square root, or I'm going to take out that I because I know this is a negative. Oh, let me do a few things here. Oh, this is weird. I have a pair of 2's, so I forgot to take that out. It's a negative, so I have to take out an I. And inside here, I'm going to do the square root of 86 all over 2a, which is negative 18. And I honestly don't want to reduce this anymore. The only thing I will reduce is the fact that they're even numbers. So I'm going to reduce this to 9, reduce that to a 2, and reduce this to just an I. So I would say that x equals negative 2 plus or minus I square root of 86 all over negative 9. I just reduced everything by 2, and I would say this is quadratic method. And it's a good thing I used quadratic method or quadratic formula because that was a lot of work. I can't imagine how that would be with like completing the square or something. Again, I like completing the square when you don't have a number in the front. Otherwise, it's like might as well do the quadratic formula because there's a lot of thinking involved with doing it. I've done it before where you have to factor out, you take out this 9, but I already saw that was going to be a lot of work for that. So I just use the quadratic formula. Next one here, I'm going to solve this by completing the square. So I'm going to do x squared plus 8x. Half of 8 is 4, and then we square it, so that'll be 16. So we take 8 divided by 2, which is 4, and then we square it, which is 16. So it gets us negative 17 plus 16. And remember, I said half of that b. So remember, half of b is very important. So I'm going to turn this into x plus 4 squared, and that's going to equal this -1. So what happens here is I have to take the square root, and because I'm taking the square root of a negative number, I know that's I. Square root of -1 is I. So it's plus or minus I. So this ends up being x is equal to, I have to subtract 4, so I get -4 plus or minus I. And this ends up being, let's see here. Whoa, what method did I use? Obviously, I use completing the square. So I use completing the square. Completing the square. So here, some challenges you might want to say when you're reflecting is if you have trouble understanding completing the square, if you have trouble memorizing the quadratic formula, things like that, I would definitely write that in here because there is a lot to this. All right, so moving on. Should be at the summary point by this time. Yep, summary time. So again, guys, always watch these videos. It's really good for when you're reviewing this stuff. And do it right before the practice too. As I mentioned before, only Unit 1 has a really big challenge to, they have the application instead of a practice. So watch that summary video before you do your practice. These practices are important because they're very similar to the test. All right, so I'm gonna check the thing, see if Nelson made a meme. Otherwise, I'm going to make a meme of Nelson. So I'll take a look. But yep, that's gonna complete our thing.